In this video, we're going to be covering security in MySQL. And you'll hear a lot, the first layer of security is going to be your firewall. And this really isn't something I want to get too deep into. But basically a firewall is a network appliance, just like the router in your home, that restricts access. So first step of security is of course going to have your either network or your system administrator, whoever works with you at your company, perfectly to do something like set up the firewall correctly to restrict access. What we're going to focus on is the database portion of security, which is really user management and restricting privileges and access. So I need you to go ahead and create a new database called world and import the world.sql file. It is a SQL dump, so you'll be dragging it into the query window and hitting run all here when you have a new database here. And what we'll have is a table like this, or excuse me, a database like this, with a city table, a country table, a country language table, and we also have a view in here. We're going to be playing with this as well as the example database and showing different ways to access the database and different permissions you can give. So once you go ahead and import that file and the database is available, the next thing I need you to do is we're going to run something from terminal. So go ahead and hit the magnifying glass up here and run terminal. And by the way, it may now come up with a blue background, sometimes it's white. If you hit command and the plus sign, you can make it a little larger so it's a little bit more visible. And the first thing I want to do is cd to this directory, which is applications mamp library bin. And I know we haven't had too much experience with command line at this point, but next I want you to copy and paste this line as is. And I said before, everything we do in this GUI in SQL Pro translates to SQL and goes to the database and then comes back and gets translated to be presented in a more nicer fashion. But technically, we could go ahead and do everything from command line. And over here I'm saying start MySQL, not the database, but the terminal. Connect to the database with the host. Here's the username, here's a password, and here's a port. Don't expect you to understand those yet. Just know you need those, and if you hit enter, you end up with a couple warnings, but you get a MySQL prompt. And this means we've connected to the database, which is exactly the same as when you go into SQL Pro and hit connect. And we're logged in as root, so I can do something like show databases, and it has to end in a semicolon, just like the normal delimiter. And well, for once here, we actually get an error. That's because I spelled it wrong. Databases. There we go. And what you'll see, let's make this a little larger here, is this list of databases is the same as this list of databases here. So technically, when we hit the drop down and open this up, this GUI, this tool, is running this command and just taking the data out and formatting it a little differently. And if we want to go and use a database, we can type use world, and it says database change, so that's the same as hitting the drop down here and selecting to the right database. And then we can do something like show tables. And you see we have city, country, country language, and country info, exactly the same as what we have over here. So we're going to go ahead and use this tool, not so much for running SQL statements, but to just log in and log out. So, so we can go ahead and prove that we have new users and new privileges and such like that. So for now, go ahead and we'll leave this open. And let's get into user management. And for SQL, we've been logging in as root. And root is has every privilege on every database here. So he can do anything. He can create databases. He can go into any one of those databases. He can create tables. He's granted all privileges. But we're going to create a couple users. We're going to create 3 users, and we're going to grant them privileges, revoke privileges, do something called flush privileges. We're going to learn how to change passwords and even how to drop users. As you could imagine, that if you were a host, meaning you were running a server like this, maybe you'd have several different clients here, all running on the same machine. And you may have different people for different projects. So you don't want people logging into the example database who are working on the world project. You don't want people from the world project to go into the example database. So we need to control the access these users have, because you may have multiple people and you don't want to give the intern root privileges. Nothing will ever come good of that. So we'll start off by saying select current user, and all these statements are case insensitive, upper or lowercase. They will both work. And if we say select current user and hit run, it lets us know we're logged in as root at localhost. And root is the username. Localhost is the host name. And a host name is an address, and it can either be in the form of an IP address like this, and localhost and 127.0.0.1 both mean your local computer, so we're not going out. But if you were to open a browser and type in google.com, obviously your computer would talk across the internet and find a address, and then eventually find a server and load that website. These are domains, and domains can be used the same as host names. They can be interchangeable. I don't want to get into that. Again, this is more networking. You'll probably learn this later on in the degree. For now, everything we do is going to be at localhost. So if you say show grants for root at localhost, you have to put the whole name in there. What we end up is these are the privileges that have been granted to root. We have all privileges on everything, and we have a proxy with grant options, which means I can grant other people permissions. If this statement doesn't run, you may have to go ahead and run the second one here. And then everything will be 127.0.0.1 instead of localhost. It all depends if you've modified your network settings, but by default, localhost should work. So next I'm going to do a select statement here. I'm going to say select star from mysql.user. In this format, MySQL is the database, and you'll notice up here it's got a line and it's above that. MySQL is actually where we're storing more information. Think of it as the database's data. It's not like one of these databases where we create data. This is where it stores user information and permission definitions and stuff like that. So I go ahead and run that. What we'll see is we have root. The host name is localhost. By the way, what this means is I can only connect to this database as root from the local machine. So meaning if someone even had the root username and password and they were on the machine next to you on the same network, they could not log in because they're not coming from host, they'll be coming from some other address. There's a password, and you'll notice it's encrypted. And there's a bunch of permission information. And we'll talk about that a little later. For the moment, I want to get a list of all the users we have. So I'm going to go ahead and say use MySQL. I'm going to switch over to that database. You'll notice here it switches to MySQL. Then I'm going to say let's select star from user. And again, here's that root. If there were other users, they would be listed here. Let's go ahead and we're actually going to create a couple users. First thing I want to show you is we can create a user like this. Create user, and I'm going to call him DBS user. But there's no password and there's no host. So if I was to run that and then go ahead and do this select, there's DBS user with no password, so it wouldn't require a password, and a %sign. A %sign is the same as creating, remember %signs when we use the like command? It could stand for null, it could stand for any amount of characters, an infinite number of characters. So what this means is DBS user can connect from any location without a password. This is a huge security violation. It means anyone who types in connect for DBS user won't need to put in a password. They can be on any machine that has access here, and they would be granted access. So for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and let's delete that person right away. Don't want to do that. Flush privileges. What that does is it tells the database to go ahead and reread all of the security permissions and make sure they're up to date. Sometimes you need to flush privileges when you're creating and deleting users. So we'll flush. Now, the next one, I can go ahead and say create user, and I say DBS user at localhost, and that would help. We wouldn't be able to connect from anywhere but localhost, but I still don't have a password in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just skip this part for now. I don't want to do that. Here's what I want to do with my users. I want to create a user, and this is how users should always be created. The username, the location, identified by PWD123. Okay, not the most secure password, but for now it'll do. And if I run that, We get no errors back. A user was created. If I run this statement over here to say select star from mysql.user, here we have root, and here we have our DBS user with a different password. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to create 3 different users and just show 3 different roles we can have for accessing a database. The next one I'm going to call DBS admin, and his password is password. And a third one I create now is DBS super, again at localhost and identified by password. Okay. When I ran this, you notice we're at localhost here and localhost here, but for the admin I said he can connect from anywhere. Now if I rerun the SQL statement, what you're going to see is, because I didn't tell him where he gets that %sign, DBS admin can connect from any location. But DBS user and DBS super can only connect locally. They have to be logged into the same box, the same computer as MySQL is running. They have to have the same address. Okay, now that we have 3 users, first thing I would do is let's update a password, because this will happen if you're administering a database. We have all our users, we have DBS user and DBS super, both, well, no, admin and super have the same password. We created user with password 123. Well, let's change them all to password just for this example. So how to change a password is to say set password for, give it the full address, meaning user at location, equal to, and then password here is a function. And I'm going to pass it password. What that's going to do is encrypt the password as it saves it. So once I run this, and I flush my privileges, I can now go ahead and rerun this guy. And you can see, even though they're encrypted, because we saved 3 different passwords as password, they're encrypted the same way. So this is not a table that people normally have access to. Users should not, only root does. This is really data we shouldn't poke around in and start updating manually. It should only be done through commands. But you will see these 3 passwords are the same, even encrypted. That's because they are, all 3 of them, the word password. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try a few things. I have another MySQL statement here, but we're going to connect with the DBS user and the password and the port number. So let's go ahead and just make sure we're able to connect. Okay, back in this window, we're still connected, but we're connected as root. So type exit. By the way, whenever you see a $, that is the that is the OS prompt, meaning operating system. Whenever you see the MySQL and a greater than sign, that means we're already connected and talking to MySQL. So for the moment, I'm going to paste that. Again, this is the one for DBS user, and it did let me connect. However, I didn't grant this person any privileges. So although I can connect, if I do what I did above, like show databases, it only shows me one database, and that's kind of like the information schema. It's not a root. It is a database, but let's put that on the side for now. I don't see all of the databases that we do here, and the reason is this person doesn't have permissions. They really can't do anything at this point except connect. So we need to grant them some work. We need to grant them the ability to do some stuff. So first, permissions are exactly what they sound like. You're permitted to do a select. You're permitted to do an insert. You're permitted to list the databases. You have to have access into it. So if you want to see what is granted, you can do stuff like show grants for, and I have DBS user. So I run that. I have usage. And if I go through all of them, all 3 of them will say the same thing. I've been granted usage. Usage basically is the minimal privileges. It's nothing. It means I can log in, but I can't do anything else. It's nice to log in, but I need to do something with it. I need to be able to access the data. This is the statement I copied from the MySQL website. And this is the format where you'll say grant privileges, and you may list columns on an object and what level of those privileges may have. To an account, and you can put the password in there. You may require encryption. We're not going to mess with encryption in this class. And then there's options we can add on. This is actually very cryptic to me. I'd rather go ahead and show you some real examples. So, privileges can be granted mostly on a few different levels. There's database level privileges like root has, meaning he can create databases, he can do stuff with them. There's table level privileges, meaning I can give you access to a database and only give you access to certain tables, not all of them. There's column level privileges, meaning I can go ahead and give you access to a table, but only certain columns. And then there's procedure level privileges, which means I can let you log in, and I can go ahead and say you can't do a select, insert, update, or delete, but I'll let you run a stored procedure. So we can get very detailed into your privileges within a database. So I'm going to skip this one. This is grant usage. We already have usage. That's the default. We have nothing else. Over here, I'm going to say let's grant select, insert, and update on the example database. Again, yours looks different from the X's I have here. Dot item. What I mean is, in that example database, there's an item table. I'm going to grant my user the ability to select, insert, and update just to that one table. And I'm granting it to DBS user. So let me run that, flush my privileges. And now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to type use example underscore. Now it says my database has changed. Well, if I do show tables, I only get the tables that I have permission to. And since I granted permissions to just the item table, there's the item table. So I'm going to say, let's select star from item. Well, that was a lot of rows. I'm going to make this wide for a moment. It tries its best to format this, but again, it's word wrapping, so it doesn't look the best. If I want, I can issue an update or a delete. An insert or an update. But if I go ahead and say something like, delete from item where, and I'll look over here at the item table for a moment. Item ID is 1. I get denied because I don't have permissions to delete from this table. So again, if your data is very important and you have to get access to people, to different users or different programs, maybe you have a program that's a reporting tool that only reads data and should never update data, you can grant them a user and only have them have select privileges and not the others. So let's go through a couple more examples. Here I granted select, insert, and update. Over here I'm just going to say I'm going to grant select on item category. So again, I'll run that and I will flush my privileges. And here, if you hit the up arrow, it'll go through the last commands. I'll say show tables. No, we still have the only item. Let's make sure I did that. Item category. Flush privileges. And let's try that again. Sometimes it doesn't update. We still got item, but let's do this. I'm going to say select star from item category. And we can select from the table. I'm guessing if I had logged out, we'll try that. If I log out and then I log back in as DBS user and then do show tables, I didn't select my database. I need to say use example 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I can say show tables. Well, it's only showing me the item table. Not sure why. Let's see, example XXXS item category. I'll have to look into that in a minute. But for now, you know you can at least select on that table. Let's try a different database. I'm also going to grant this user access to the world database and the country info. And if we crawl country info over here was a view. So I have access to the view, but I have access to nothing else. So let's run that one and flush those privileges. And now I'm going to switch. Let's say use world and show tables. And I can say select star from country info. And there's those 983 countries. See? Same as over here. Cool. So we can go ahead and get a little more detailed. I'm going to grant that DBS user select privileges to the country language table, but only 2 columns. So let me run that and flush privileges. And I'm going to say, let's select star from country language. It tells me I don't have access. Well, the problem is I'm trying to select all of them. If I go ahead and say country code and language, I'll get those 2. So we can get very detailed and only letting you see certain parts of tables. Well, let's try this now. Let's go ahead and try to connect. Well, we are already connected as, let's see, user. Let's connect as admin, and then we'll do some grants. So I'm going to go ahead and grant admin complete access to the example database. So I'm granting all privileges. That's what all stands for. So here we said select. Here I'm saying all on the example database .star. This means everything in the database. And then we're going to grant that to that DBS admin. And let's flush those privileges. And now let's connect over here. Again, let's type exit to get out and paste that statement with DBS admin here. Okay, we've connected. And if I type show databases, T-A-B-A-S-E-S, it does show me the example database. I have full access to this database. So I'm going to say use example. And now I'm going to do show tables. And it gives me all of the tables. And I can go ahead and say, let's see, let's pick a table. Select star from activity log. Let's just take a look there. And I'll make this nice and wide so perhaps we can see the data. You see how it looks better without the wrap. And I can do something like, say, update activity log. Set activity text equal to something where activity log ID is equal to 5. Well, let's actually update activity text here, not test. And then if I do, you'll see that it changed it to something. So we do have the permissions to do anything in this database. We could create tables by pasting in a create table statement. That's because we have all privileges on this database, as opposed to DBS user, which only has privileges to what? Certain tables and even certain columns. Let's keep going. I can go ahead and grant, let's do this. I'm going to change this one. This is going to be super. I'm going to grant all to star dot star. That's kind of scary. What this means is I'm going to grant all the privileges on all databases to DBS Super with grant option. Over here we said with grant option as well. What grant option means is I can grant other users permissions. So DBS admin now has the permission to grant permissions to like DBS user. So let's do that. I'm going to copy that, and for the moment we'll paste this over here. And let's see, we need to do the example database dot, oh, I don't know, users table. So I'm logged in here as DBS admin, right? And I'm going to go ahead and say grant it. Again, we've always been doing our grants as user. We're going to grant select on the users table to that user, and it works. So now, because when we granted permissions to this user, we said with grant option, he can now grant permissions to other people. Here, I'm going to go ahead and run this one. This is we're going to grant star dot star to DBS Super. And I'll flush those permissions. And now, I need to connect as DBS Super. And I'm going to copy this. We'll type exit out again, And this time I'll connect as DBS Super here. And what we can do here is type show databases. We only have the information schema. Well, we did grant them star dot star, but we said it's super at %. Oops, I made a mistake here. What it should be is super at localhost, because super was created to be a local host, not an everyone. So let's go ahead and run that again and flush privileges. And if I run that again, well, let's try exit. Run the grant again. It's DBS super at localhost. Let's confirm. That's what we created the user as, DBS super at localhost. And I'm granting them all those permissions and then flushing the privileges. So let's try that again. Run that again. Connect and do show databases. And now, sometimes permissions get a little sticky. Sometimes you have to log out and try it again and then go back in. They don't always flush. Sometimes I need to run that flush privileges to get in. But this person now, DBS Super, has access to everywhere. Now, if you want a list of all the different types of privileges you can grant, because there are more than select, insert, update, and delete. There's actually a privilege to whether you can take a SQL dump or not. There's different privileges out there. So you can go ahead and go to this website on MySQL, and it will show you all of the grant permissions. Now, all of this has been interesting in the fact that we're learning security on here, but you may need to learn the syntax at some point, but there actually is also a GUI way to access all of this. If you go ahead and click on the Users tab over here, here is our root, our DBS user, our super, and our admin. So you can do all of the work through here. And if you click on like DBS user, again, that's the user and the password. Global privileges, we don't have any. However, super has global privileges, because he has access to everything. Stuff like create view, show view, reload, shutdown, create users, grant. Schema privileges are specifically that, privileges for each. They call it a schema. Schema is synonymous with database, so this drop down here. So if I go to DBS user here and click on the schema privileges, what you'll see is if I go to world, let's see, that's DBS user as localhost. It'll let you grant privileges to different schemas. For some reason, that's not updating the way I intended it to. Sometimes privileges, these are all the available, and then you can pick a database here, like my example database, and you can put them over to grant them and hit apply. It doesn't quite show you the current privileges. And there's stuff here like max updates, max connections. We'll don't need to get into that. I found this tool to be not nearly as fluent and accurate as I would like for managing users. So I'll show you another GUI. Previously we used MySQL Workbench, and I'm going to connect. And over here, what we have is users and privileges. Again, we're talking to the same database, so here's all the users we created, and here's all the different info. You'll notice DBS Super is listed twice because I granted him privileges from anywhere, and then I granted him privileges from localhost. And those privileges can actually be different. You can go ahead and say you have different permissions when you're in the office than when you log in from home. But let's take a look at DBS user and click over at schema privileges and see if this, okay. Yes, it does. If you click over on DBS admin, it's showing all of the privileges available on that database. And of course, that's not showing for DBS user. Is there a way to refresh this? But if we go over to like administrative roles, we'll see DBS Super has lots of permissions. And there's roles too. These roles encompass permissions. So if you grant like the backup admin, you'll be able to have certain roles automatically granted from you. There's also a way to revoke permission. So perhaps someone quits, perhaps someone leaves. You need to be able to go in here and either delete the user, which You can go ahead and delete them, or you may just go ahead and maybe they change roles and you need to update them. So you can go in here and click on permissions and revoke them all. Or you can do something like revoke, and you can say all permissions, or revoke just their grant option, and you give it a database username and host name, and you're able to revoke them. So there is another way of doing it by accessing the user table in MySQL. I don't recommend this. I wanted to show it to you that we can access it as root, but it can cause later problems down the line, so please don't modify anything in the MySQL database. You always want to use either revoke or grant, or go ahead and use a GUI of some sort to give someone or take away permissions from someone. And this doesn't show you the current permissions. You need to go ahead and actually just apply it here, unfortunately. So that's really the overall look on security. When you guys graduate, chances are you'll host either a website or a mobile app. And when you go ahead and get access, you'll probably be on one server with several clients. It's not like, depending on how you set it up, you may not get your own server to yourself. So you will be granted your user and certain permissions to the database. So please remember that. Thank you.